Hello everyone and welcome to State House Report with Senator Bill Beagle. I'm Lloyd Shoemaker, your host, and I know you're used to seeing me sitting in the locker room, but not today. I'm going to be spending some time sitting here and talking with the Senator about what's going on in Columbus. Let me tell you a little bit about Bill Beagle if you don't already know. He currently represents the 5th District.
Okay.
There are several counties involved. They are parts of Darke, Miami, Montgomery, and Preble counties.
That's correct. Good.
And he's been in the Senate in Ohio for since 2011. His background was city commissioner in Tip City for 2 terms. Actually, appointed to 1 term and elected to 1, if I remember correctly.
Over 6 years.
Yep. And he also serves as chairman of the Senate Finance Subcommittee on the Workforce. Senator Beagle's years of experience in both local government and small business have helped make him leader in the community and an effective advocate for the people he represents. Bill and his wife Karen and their children live in the southern part of Miami County in Tip City. And Senator, we want to welcome you to the State House Report, and I'm sure you've got a lot of good things that you want to bring us up to date on. But first, let me just ask you this. The state of Ohio financially and from a workforce perspective is in pretty good shape. You've been there since 2011. You've obviously had a chance to work with the Governor Kasich on this situation. Tell us how we got to where we are.
Well, we got to where we are with a lot of people working towards the same goal. And we got to where we are by making some difficult choices, and I think we all can relate to that. Nothing good comes easy necessarily. So in 2011, our unemployment rate was in the low double digits, 9–10%. We'd lost, almost 400,000 jobs over the preceding 4 or 5 years. Our tax rates were higher, and the last budget that we had done had $8 billion in one-time money from the federal government in it. So the group coming in 2011, including Governor Kasich and me and others, you immediately face this $8 billion that isn't going to be there, and what do you do with that? And that's when we got busy making some difficult decisions, and those decisions had some benefits. We were able to balance our budget without raising taxes, because that was really the main question, is will we go back to taxpayers and say, you know what, we need a little more out of your pocket to help balance that budget, or is there another way to do it? And we went the other way. And we made some difficult choices. People were upset with us, but we were able to live within our means. We didn't spend more than we take in. And we were able to not only provide for the essential services that the state needs to do, we were able to put some money into the state's savings account, which was literally down to less than $1. Wow. And we were able to begin to reduce the tax rates that you and I pay, as well as the businesses pay. As the economy began to turn around and people start adding jobs and tax revenue came in, we were able to say, you know what, rather than spend it, let's give it back to the citizens in the form of lower tax rates. We also continue to boost our state savings account, and as we all know from our personal experience, if times get tough again in the future, and at some point they will, we will be able to have a reserve of dollars that we can go to, kind of like a savings account, so that we don't have to cut education first thing. We don't have to cut healthcare first thing, or we don't have to go back to the taxpayers right away and say, we have to raise taxes. We'll have this pool of dollars to get us over from some rough spots. But we've been under a lot of pressure to spend that money and put more money into whether it's education, infrastructure, any number of worthy goals. But we've had to have that discipline. So by making some difficult choices, sticking to them, and riding out some difficult things, we've been able to help the private sector start hiring again. We've added 300,000 jobs over the last few years. We're paying less in taxes, and I think we've got Ohio as a much more positive story. We've seen some benefit from that.
When you talked about the unemployment rate being in double digits, now was that based upon the federal numbers, or was that our own numbers? Because those federal numbers, they play with those all the time.
Yeah, that was reference to the state of Ohio numbers, and we are seeing lower participation rates. And as you mentioned in the introduction, I chair the Senate's workforce development efforts, which is making sure that our kids are getting the education they need so they can, have good skills when they get out of whether it's high school or college or the Career Tech Center. But it's also making sure that as a state, we have an educated and trained workforce so that employers want to come here and employers want to stay here. And we want to make sure that if we've got talented people who aren't looking for work, we need to make sure we change that equation. So it is an Ohio number, but we are aware that people are not participating in the workforce as much as they used to, and that's still a problem we need to address.
Is this kind of like the chicken and the egg thing? What comes first, the available workforce or the companies here who need the people? Which comes first?
It's, I think it begins with the workforce. You know, my experience on local government and working with economic development at the state level, you know, I've had an opportunity to talk to companies who have located businesses here from out of state, or maybe they were expanding and looking to see where are we going to put this plant. And they've decided to pick somewhere in our area. And we've had conversations with them, and they've walked me through the decision-making process. And what we've been told is that, you know, you could offer as much incentive as you want for somebody, you know, so many dollars to come here, and that's usually what makes the headlines. But in the end, what matters is if they can't find the 100 people they need or the 200 people they need, they're not going to come here. It doesn't matter how much money we offer them, because they're still, you know, hiring the wrong person is expensive. Churning employees is expensive. They need, you know, first and foremost, they need to make sure that they've got the workforce they need. So it is incumbent upon us to make sure that as a state, we've got trained workers ready to go, and then those people will be employed, I think, by local companies expanding. And there are certain companies that will, though they're not hiring 100 people, they're hiring 3 people. And those people will be employed there, and then we're going to create opportunities, and it'll attract more businesses from outside the state as well. So.
Well, you've got a company, a glass company down in Dayton that's currently growing, adding, what, 3,000 employees or close
quite
to...
a bit. Quite a bit, yeah. It started out as 1,000 or close to 1,000, and now they're probably north of 1,500. I think they're looking to add, and I think that there's opportunities to continue to grow that.
Well, there can't be those kind of people just sitting around with nothing to do. They have to be getting those people from other employers who are now going to suffer because of their people going to work over there. I don't know what the incentive is, whether it's more money or whatever, but there's going to be a void someplace.
There are, and so they will be hiring people. Likely, you know, some will be people who aren't on the employment rolls now for whatever reason, and then, but yes, there will be employees who will be leaving from one employer to another, and it creates opportunities at some existing companies. And so, one of the things that we've been working hard on is not only how do we you know, how do we align it so that our high schools and colleges are teaching the kids the skills that they need for these jobs. And we've done some work along those lines, largely by talking to employers and saying, what skills do you need? And, you know, what positions do you have open? And not just now, but what do you see coming 3 years down the road and 5 years down the road? And then we work with the Department of Higher Education, our 2-year colleges and our 4-year colleges, and we work with the Department of Education, who cover our career tech centers and our K through 12 system, and we're aligning it so that those skills that the employers say they need are being taught at these various places. So the other thing we're doing is working to make sure that for those folks who have been unemployed for a while, that we're getting them to re-enter the workforce. And that's a more difficult challenge, is how do we take people who have been chronically unemployed or face certain barriers and get them back into the workforce. And so we've got some public and private partnerships around where, you know, faith-based groups and others are working to get, you know, resume writing skills, interviewing skills, to some of these folks who haven't been in the workforce in a long time, get them basic computer skills, for example, and some other things that will make them employable. And working hard to make sure that once they get a job, that they're able to move up a career ladder and earn better wages and you know, family-sustaining wages. But the first step is to get them in the door and get them back into the habit of working. And it's good for families. It's good for them to be back into the workforce. But it's a little longer row to hoe to try and get some of these folks who haven't been employed in a long time. So there are a pool of people for some of these positions, and there is some shuffling amongst existing companies. And, you know, as someone who's got 2 kids in college, I would love, and one of them is going to be staying in the Cincinnati area, so, you know, I would love to have these jobs so that as my children graduate, you know, they're going to stay right here in the Miami Valley, or at least in Ohio, and find opportunities. So And ultimately, if we have positions open, workers will move to where the jobs are, and I think that we'll, if we can continue to have some success, and we've had a number of economic development successes in our region over the last few years. People will be coming in from areas, but it's a challenge that isn't going to go away, and it's something we're working hard on.
Well, what I find in my business is that people are going to where the jobs are. They have to, because those ones who are not willing to relocate, especially at the professional level,
Right.
Are going to take a lot longer to find a job because they have to wait on somebody else to vacate, and it doesn't always work out at their time schedule. So.
Right.
Well, listen, I'm sure there's a lot of good things going on in Columbus that you'd like to share with the people out there. So why don't you just go ahead and tell us what good things you're involved in over there?
Sure. Well, there's a number of things that are going on that I think are important, and we've got a number of initiatives that that we're working on in the General Assembly that are, I think, important to all Ohioans. And a couple of topics I wanted to talk about first was in the area of heroin. Which is a problem that we've been addressing, statewide for a number of years. It began with, and even as I came in 2011, and we began to shut down some of these pill mills and these areas, especially in southeast Ohio, where folks could come in and get these painkillers, and it creates addiction problems. And we've worked hard to shut those down, and what we've seen is a transition to this heroin problem. And what we've been doing at the state is working with our local law enforcement and making sure that we've got all the experts around the table and helping us craft some policies, and what can we do to help them in their mission by talking to our local sheriffs and police departments and mental health professionals and addiction professionals. And we've had a series of bills to try and address the problem. So we've got some where we are allowing friends, family members and friends of recovering addicts addicts, to compel them to seek treatment. And that would be a court-ordered treatment. It's something we've only been doing for a couple years now, and it wasn't without controversy. On the one hand, we heard stories from folks who had their son or their daughter had a relapse or had a weekend on drugs, and then something happened. They had a run-in with the law, and so now they've got a police record, or they're in jail, or they crashed the car, or perhaps in the worst cases, they committed suicide or something happened. And so the idea of compelling and forcing a certain amount of treatment made sense in some cases. We did have some concerns from folks that we are creating a legal process that could be abused, and could people end up being forced into something that they didn't really want. So we had to work hard to create some guardrails that I think protect people in the right situations, but will allow for some to get help that they need to help them get over this hump and shed this addiction or get this mental health treatment that they need, which can help all of us. We'll have fewer people in our jails, fewer families torn apart, and the police officers can be working on things that are more important. We've also worked towards creating task force. The Attorney General has a heroin task force. The Governor's office has a cabinet level group working on heroin and heroin addiction and how we face these issues. And then at the state level, there is a drug called naloxone. It goes by the brand name of Narcan, and it is something you may be hearing about in the newspapers. And it is a drug that will reverse an overdose. And so it is, in fact, a life-saving drug. And we piloted this up in Lorain County, and there happened to be a batch of heroin that was laced with another powerful opiate called fentanyl. And so somehow these folks are mixing these things together and creating a drug that's actually more powerful than heroin by itself, and it catches the user off guard, and they end up overdosing. Yeah. And there was, I think it was like 21 people got a batch of this and all overdosed. In 16 cases they administered this Narcan, this naloxone, and saved lives up there. And we realized pretty quickly that having police officers and sheriffs and EMTs in possession of this in their daily routines, and giving them civil immunity so that it is not, so that it is safe to administer, kind of like a Good Samaritan thing. We're trying to bring this person back, and I won't face legal repercussions that will prevent me from making that decision. And I don't want to be rather safe than sorry and not administer it. We want to protect them from that. And we've rolled this out statewide. And it's been administered a lot, and it is just it further evidence that we have a real problem on our hands. Some other things we've done to kind of allow access to that Narcan is we've allowed initially to have family members and friends be prescribed the drug as well. So if I know my child is wrestling with addiction, maybe I've got a prescription of that sitting in my house somewhere. You know, my daughter's allergic to peanuts, so we have an EpiPen in our house, and she carries one in her purse. Something along those lines, where you keep it there because you know, I'm at greater risk of my son or daughter having some sort of overdose, and I need to intervene. We've also are transitioning where to get away from even a prescription for that, and empowering our pharmacists to be able to not administer the drug, but to deliver the drug to family members and friends without a prescription, so that it is a little more access, and we'll be out there saving lives. So that, you know, that's what we're doing for people who are using the drug. So, you know, how do we get people from using the drug to begin with? How do we get them from that overdose level? So we're making efforts in those areas as well, as we talk about spending, and you know, we are working to spend more money on drug addiction services and mental health services. And for those folks who are on who used managed care, you know, we are using more what we call behavioral health within managed care, so that folks who need, you know, mental health treatment or counseling type things can get access to that, so that they don't turn to drugs as a way to cope with their issues. We also are putting more money into addiction services for those who are addicted, can help get off the drug before they ever need the Narcan or the naloxone. We're also working to treat our prisoners. You know, 80% of the prison population has had issues with drug or alcohol addiction. And so what we're doing is making sure that while they are incarcerated, we are using that time for something beneficial, and that would involve getting them off their addiction. And so we're trying to make sure that we use that time so that then when they return to our communities, and many sentences are less than a year, so these folks will be returning back to our communities. They can come back drug-free, addiction-free, and begin, you know, we talked about entering the workforce. You know, is there a way to get them back into the workforce, being productive members of society? So we're trying to be more productive along those lines. And one of the things we're doing is rather than send people, you know, nonviolent offenders who have short-term sentences, rather than sending them to a prison, we will be keeping them maybe more locally. We have these community-based correction facilities. They're cheaper. It's less money to keep somebody there for a day than it is in a prison. You can also have family members a little closer by, and you can have a better success rate. And so we're looking to put more people, the right types of people, into these community-based situations that might prove more beneficial.
Well, I assume this Narcan you're talking about is a non-addictive drug.
Right.
It just takes care of
blocks.
those.
It's a blocker that that blocks the lethal effects of the opiate there. And there's other ways. As we go to treat people, we have non-narcotic ways to treat people. There's Suboxone and some things that I think maybe there are alternatives that don't involve giving somebody a different type of narcotic that's a little less lethal. There's other ways to do that, and we're exploring those as well.
Well, one of the big things that is on most people's minds in the state of Ohio is education. And what are the people in Columbus doing about education, supporting it financially? Anything new coming down the road?
Well, in the years that I've been in the General Assembly, we have gone from, you know, when we first did that first budget, which was kind of difficult, education suffered some. And what we've been doing since then in the 2013 budget and the 2015 budget is as Ohio's prospered a little more, we've been putting more money into education. So the good news is that we're spending more money on education than we ever have in the past. What we do every 2 years is as a community, or rather as the General Assembly, we work to figure out how are we going to allocate those dollars amongst our own local communities. And that is the funding formula that we hear so much about. And it is a big part of what we do in odd number years for our communities. And so, you know, for someone like me, I represent the urban part of Dayton. So I've got the Dayton Public Schools are in my district, as is Piqua, as is Arcanum, New Madison, Tri-Village. So I've got some very rural areas, I've got some very urban areas, and kind of everything in between. So when I look at the formula, we need to make sure that it's treating people equitably. So every 2 years we work, there's a lot of different opinions on how to fund our schools. And everyone agrees that property taxes are a little burdensome, and wouldn't it be nice to get away from that? And so we did boost state support in the hopes of helping relieve some of that pressure on our property taxes. And we'll see if the economy continues, we'll see if we can continue to do that. One of the things that we've done is, I think, besides changing the formula and putting more money into the formula, we've actually made more money available to our schools through special programs like the Straight A Fund. And what the governor did, and with the support of the General Assembly, is rather than just put more money into the formula that gets dispersed across 88 counties, is he creates a pool of money that districts will compete for. And it's been very exciting, and I think Piqua actually won an award out of the Straight A Fund, and now I'll need to double check that. But what you're finding is that schools will combine with each other, and they'll come up with something innovative, and then they apply for the funds to get a program to launch something that they couldn't do on their own, couldn't afford to do on their own, and the state will then step in and help them do something that's creative and a little outside the box, and may end up being something that could be replicated across the state. And we've been doing this a number of years, and it shows an additional commitment to education, but also some creativity in that we're requiring the districts to compete for them, and can produce some outstanding results.
You have been in Columbus now as a senator since 2011. You live in Tip City.
That's true.
And we talked about your district. How often, or what is your plan for getting back on the street in the communities where you're serving?
Being involved in my community is kind of how I came to politics. So I was involved in the Tip City community before I ever wound up on the city council, and that just seemed like an extra step in my community service. And one of the best things about being in the state senate is that you get to serve all or part of 4 counties, and it's vital to be engaged as a legislator, to be engaged in my communities. And I'm lucky because my district is, in a manner of speaking, compact. Within 45 minutes I can be to Eaton, which is the seat of Preble County. I can be to Greenville, which is the seat of Darke County. And my district is fairly compact. We have senators who get from one end of their district to the other is a 2.5, 3-hour drive. So I can be engaged across my communities pretty easily, and I am. And so I spend my time when I'm not in Columbus. I do have a business I run. I've got an apartment business, including some units in Piqua. And when I'm not doing that, you're out and you get immersed in the community, because that's where your experts are. That's where I meet with my superintendents, and they let me know exactly what I'm, about that funding formula we talked about. I hear about that. I hear about the state report card. I hear about how we evaluate teachers. And since I'm not, that's not my area of expertise, those are lessons, those are things that I take back to Columbus. And as we make policy, I'll say, hey, I heard from my superintendents, this is the problem they've got with that. And you can only do that by being involved in the community. So it's attending the Rotary meetings, it is attending your Chamber of Commerce stuff, it is going out and touring your companies, and it's really incumbent upon us as voters to reach out to people like me and the people in my position and invite me into the community, invite me to your meeting, invite Representative Huffman to your meeting, so that we can get to know your business. I grew up in the suburbs. I represent an agriculture community. What I know about agriculture is because I've had farmers reach out to me and I've spent half a day on their farm. I've been out, I've seen poultry production, I've seen swine production, I've seen grain farms, and you get out there, and that's how you learn things. And so it's incumbent upon us as voters to reach out to our legislators and get them involved. And it's certainly it's incumbent upon me to get involved and get to know the community. And those are the experiences you take back to Columbus, and you can speak on behalf of your community.
Well, and having the foundation of being a businessman, being in business for yourself, also the foundation of being a city council member, certainly gives you the strength to be able to understand what the business people and the local politicians, representatives are going through, And when you go back over to the General Assembly, then you can carry that message not only from your own experience, but like you say, but getting on the street and talking to the people here.
I agree. And you know, before I did my own business, I worked for a bank and did financial analysis and understand you know, analysis. And you know, there's plenty of, you know, state government is complex, and you need people who can analyze things, and you can, and there's a lot of just common sense involved in business that we need to transfer over to government. You know, and government isn't business. In business, I tell people, you know, there's a hierarchy. If you're not returning my calls, and then I'll call your boss, or my boss calls your boss, and we get things moving. And in government, nobody works for anybody else. You know, I can't, you know, my other senators up there, I can't make them do anything.
Right.
I have to persuade them. And so it is a relationship business. And the skills I developed out in the business world, dealing with customers, dealing with employees, dealing with bosses, all are very valuable when it comes to dealing with folks over. I can't make them do anything. I need to persuade them to do things, and all those skills come into the fore, as well as the common sense thing about living within our means. Let's set goals. How do we measure success? And if we're going to have a program, how do we decide ahead of time what makes it successful or not? And using metrics and making database decisions all come from the business world, and there's something to be said for that. But government works a little bit differently.
Yeah, it certainly does. It certainly does. Well, Senator, listen, we want to thank you for your time this morning. I know you've got to get on the road and drive careful
back
out
in
there.
Columbus. Yep,
and back
that's
in
correct.
Columbus, you've got a meeting.
Fighting the
I think,
good fight
this morning yet. So
it'll be great to be back.
Senator Beagle, we appreciate you being here, and we want to encourage you to not only watch this show with Senator Beagle, but in the future there's going to be more State House reports from Senator Beagle.
We've got all sorts of things we didn't talk about today. So.
Yeah, so he wants to share all that with you down the road, so be sure and stay tuned in to Channel 5, WOTVC Channel 5 here in Piqua, Ohio. I'm Lloyd Shoemaker, your host, and thanks for joining us.